Okay, so if you watch the video on the trace protocol, this is a edit. That was actually the trace architecture, which is just a description of software architecture, how to look at something from a system's point of view, specifically a reactive entity system. I didn't really touch on the temporal part other than just describing it. And I also didn't touch on the actual protocol, which is one of the new internet protocols that I'm kind of suggesting. But also, the main thing I wanted to get out of that was like, that last video was, hey, people need to understand how software works. If you look at it in this way, in this kind of architecture with, it's like a system. You have inputs, you have the description of the system, and you have outputs. If you look at it in that way, almost anyone can understand how some piece of software works. But I do want to go into the protocol part of it, because I think that's really important for how do you actually solve problems that exist in the world with some kind of protocol. I don't have a 100% done. This isn't a protocol that's set in stone. I think, again, back to that point earlier, it's like everyone should understand how this type of system works, and they should be able to define their own protocols, their own rules for how they want to communicate on the internet. And if you do it in this way, like looking at software systems in this way of input, process, output, anyone can come up with what they think are good inputs into their system. Anyone can come up with what they think, who should be allowed to listen to the outputs of their system. And so in that sense, the main thing that I really want to say or communicate is just how to describe this system, which is input, process, output. And then again, people can come up with the protocol for how they want who they want to be able to provide as an input, what should be allowed to be an input, what they want the process to be like, and who can subscribe to the outputs. So one thing that I think is important for a protocol that I would want is testability. So that means you can test different stuff. You can test different inputs into your software system and see what it's like, see what the resulting output is. And you should also be able to see like previous tests for that software system, that input, or that process. So in other words, you should be able to see what the impact of using some kind of software is or would be on you as a user or as like a downstream consumer of that software system. And I know these two videos are pretty theoretical, and to a lot of people that isn't valuable, but I think they need to be, there at least needs to be some documentation of them, and so that's why I'm taking the time to do this part. Like I said, I'll get to the user interface part, which is like more of a practical implementation of this. But by the way, the reason why I think it's important to describe this system, first of all, and how it can be applied is going back to the analogy of this is basically Google Sheets or a spreadsheet. And what do you use a spreadsheet for? Well, you can use it for almost anything. Like you can use it for accounting, you can use it for tracking your to-do list, you can use it for groceries, you can use it for literally probably communicating with someone else. You can use it for anything that you want to like keep organized, or do math, or a lot of stuff you can do just with Google Sheets or an Excel spreadsheet. And so that's kind of what this architecture or system is. It's kind of like a Google Sheet, so you can do a lot of stuff with it. It's just a computing architecture or process. So again, I do want to say that I was kind of describing the trace architecture before. In terms of the trace protocol, that's where I think we need rules about who can subscribe to my outputs and who do I allow to be one of my inputs into my personal operating system. So I guess I will give kind of an example about why looking at software like this is important. And that goes to social media. We all have mixed feelings about social media. We see how apps and stuff, some of the publishers or some of the stuff that we see on the apps that's input into our brains and stuff, we don't know the impact of that, but we would like to be able to see that beforehand. We would like to be able to control and understand that, what's going into our brains. And we would like to be able to see the impact of what we're putting out there, other than just likes and like views and all these superficial metrics. Ideally, we would want to see how many people are we actually helping with our output that we're putting out on the internet, and how many people is it bad for? Like we don't even know that as creators, because all we get is like some really superficial metrics, and the algorithm decides the process part, and they don't even really know. No one knows exactly what that process is. So this is kind of a step towards a world where everyone can understand a little bit more about software, and we can trace back to what the inputs are and test their effect on downstream systems. Another thing about not just the testability and like kind of safety aspects of the internet and how that's important, but also the property part of this new IPs. So we have new internet protocols and new intellectual property. So if you look at a software system in this way, where any given thing in software, like a post or picture, video, text, tweet, whatever, that's a thing. Some of those things get inputs from other things. Like if you generate an image based on like a couple other images, well, those two other images plus your prompt is the input. That processes something and generates a new output. But how do you measure where that output actually came from? Did it really come from your prompt? Did it come a lot from the input pictures that you got off the internet or something that someone else created? And so if we can measure those kinds of things and measure the impact of different inputs, then we can assign value to the providers of those inputs. In other words, it's a way to trace back how much someone or something contributed to something downstream. An example, other than the example that I gave about pictures, videos, you can think about like say you have an Instagram feed where it's all about fitness or something. Not Instagram. I take back Instagram. Say you have a social media feed, such as Instagram, TikTok, whatever. There's only a few, I guess. But say you have a feed and it's supposed to help motivate you to exercise. You can put a bunch of inputs into that feed and then test two different versions with two different inputs and see which versions of the feed. In other words, which inputs actually helped people get more fit and exercise more or whatever. Today we can't really do that because, or at least not with the feeds that are really popular, because again, they only let us look at surface level metrics. But yeah, this is a step after that. This is like a step towards a direction where everyone has a little bit more say and understanding of software. And I think we do that with new internet protocols, new intellectual property, the trace protocol, which involves testability and traceability of, and understandability of software systems. There's also a big element of privacy and ownership. So I'm already at 10 minutes, so I'm not gonna go into that, but just remember that because people can generate and understand software now, you can own these functions, you can own this code, you can own the data and control it as an individual, maybe in your own cloud, maybe you're on your home server, but you can own it. And so therefore, you can keep stuff more private, which is good because it helps you capture the value that your software brings. And so yeah, so that's pretty advanced. I do want to talk about the UI stuff, which is how to kind of bring this down to what can actually be implemented. And I will get into that in the next video. All right, that's Trace Protocol, part 2.